Hello, everyone. My name is Pil-Young Kim. I'm a professor in psychology at the University of Denver. So I've been sharing some of my teaching notes with everyone because I've been studying and teaching the impact of AI on human minds. So today in this little clip that what I want to share with you is about the question, why do we trust AI more than ourselves or experts? Okay, I'm going to start with an example. So very recently, my younger son, he wake up feeling very sick and it was middle of the night. He had very high fever, coughing a lot. But at the same time, once he's up, that his energy level seems to be okay. I was pretty confused about his symptoms because it just didn't seem like a very typical cold symptoms. So in the middle of the night, what do we do? One option is to call, trying to reach doctors, but often that's difficult to do. So I pulled up my computer and asked ChatGPT, here are these symptoms. My son is at this age. What's your thoughts in terms of what's going on? And ChatGPT gave me pretty long responses of all the things that might be possible. So here, let's look at my behaviors here, right? Why did I chose to ask ChatGPT at that moment instead of trying to call a doctor or nurse or go on the internet to search for some answers? One is definitely convenience. It was just very convenient. And if I may trying to call a kind of emergency line, I might be actually have to wait for a while in the middle of the night, like really trying to like talk to somebody. But I have to confess, this was not my first time doing this. And in the past, I've asked ChatGPT more than a few more times about some medical advice, mostly minor. And it tend to give me pretty comprehensive list of the things that can possibly going on. And sometimes I did get pretty good insight into what possibly happening. And because of those previous experiences, it's possible that at that moment I was somewhat trusting ChatGPT to give me a decent answer that would be helpful at that moment. All right, let's step back now a little bit and looking at the situation that it was medically non-emergency, not very serious situation. So it's okay in some ways that I was getting the information from ChatGPT, just like how I might do, just go on an internet and getting the advice. Eventually, of course, I brought my son to a doctor to really get the accurate like diagnosis the next day. But as I'm looking into this topic, that whether are we becoming more and more trusting AI, and in some cases, it's possible that we're trusting AI more than our own thoughts or expert advice. I'm starting to see more reasons shift in that. So, for example, the study that was done in 2019, so just about 5 years ago, studies suggesting that human us tend to actually trust more the medical advice from doctors. So even 5 years ago, although ChatGPT was not as like widely available or not something that people been using as much as we do nowadays, but AI was available. And some people, sometimes think that advice from AI can be potentially more accurate because it is based on algorithm, presumably more based on the facts than some other kind of individual bias or thoughts. That's at least what people may have thought at the time when it comes to algorithm. However, still, like something like medical advice, more people reported that they trust advice from doctor than advice from AI because at the time people didn't really think that AI could consider like personal context and circumstances and brought all that into the medical advice. Fast forward now, the study that was conducted last year, there were more than 300 participants and medical advice about medical conditions on a pretty wide range, like minor to severe. And participants were evaluating those and then whether they trust those advice. And they were either from AI, like a ChatGPT, or actual physicians and doctors. And even when participants knew that those advices were from AI, the participants reported to trust advice from AI just as much as the advice from a human doctors. As AI, we all know, becoming more intelligent, and just, how I did that middle of night when I had sick son, we are becoming more and more trusting informations and advice that AI is providing. There's a fine line, though, that people are starting to concern whether we're overly trusting or overly relying on AI's advice. At the same time, the flip side will be that there's diminishing tendency for us to think critically or independently when we're making important decisions. So for that, I want to discuss one study that I also read recently. So this study was also conducted last year, 2024. And in this study, this was participants that were in UK, and the study was done online. And participants were engaged into a kind of modified version of what's called trust game. So this is like a pretty widely used game in psychological studies. And the participants can earn money. And the way to do so is also whether they make a decisions to invest on the other player. So whether they like trust the other player, whether they're like reciprocating this trust, or decide not to keep the money to themselves. So that's why it's called a trust game and a gist. And in this game, what's most important aspect was that when people are making those kind of decisions, whether to trust or not the other player, they were receiving advice from AI or human experts. And the participants believe that these AI and human experts, they really understand how the game works and also the history of the other player. For example, the participants may decide to trust the other player. AI might make a suggestions that do not trust the other player, and for example, like keeping the money to themselves. And of course, those advice were provided randomly by design, although participants didn't know. And when researchers have looked at the results, very interestingly, the participants were more likely to change their decision when the advice was to change their decision. And that was made by AI rather than human expert. In other words, the people were trusting AI advice more than human expert advice. And as I mentioned, because these advice were coming at them randomly, right? So this tendency of following AI advice made them lose more money, so lead to worse outcome. And so this is actually very striking. And this kind of tendency of following AI's advice was even more so when there was a clearly discrepancies between the participants' kind of own intuition, own decision, and AI advice. So all the kind of contextual factors suggesting that for this trial, it'll be good to trust the other player. AI was making contradicting advice. There's a greater tendency for people to changing their decision, AI advice rather than the human experts, right? The greater tendency to do because it was like leading to worse outcomes. We may consider that the participants were showing over reliant kind of pattern to AI advice. And now we should really wonder why the participants may have done that when they probably was figuring out that AI wasn't always making a good advice. And one of the explanations that researchers were providing was that this was kind of computer generated, in some ways, online game. So it's possible that participants thought this is online kind of computer-based game. So AI must really know the rules and potential outcomes and strategies the best. So that might have led participants to overtrust, over rely on the AI. But it's looking at the pattern of the behaviors that the participants were showing, it definitely concerned me that somehow, somewhere, that the participants were losing that kind of motivations to think independently when there's advice from AI, right? So I think especially when AI was giving us this kind of contradicting advice, it seems that somehow it was lowering the participants' confidence about their own decision and relying more on AI's advice. And as we going into age, that we can only kind of expecting that a lot more decisions going to be suggested by AI and AI agent, right? It is predicted to be pretty much available in all aspects of our life. And given how convenient it may be, those decisions, suggestions, and advice from AI will start really influencing us. And the problem is that the advice from AI is not always better than our own decision, right? Even myself, when I checking the AI suggestions or summaries and research I conducted, and when I actually really looking into the details, I still see quite a lot of mistakes and inaccurate information there. So it's very critical to double check AI's suggestion and summaries and research outputs. But it is concerning, though, that we have tendency that we might believe that AI may start having more superior ability than us to make a better decision and start relying on those when AI's decision might be based on inaccurate understanding of situation, or sometimes maybe even biased intentionally or unintentionally. So yes, so these are some kind of details that I wanted to share with you that I thought was important to understand the human behaviors and minds when sometimes we can have tendency to rely on AI's advice more so than ourselves or human experts. All right, thank you so much for your attention, and I'll come back with another topic and discussion. Bye.